Imagine this, a 7-month pregnant woman walks into a luxury hotel, hoping to surprise her husband on their anniversary. But instead of roses, she finds betrayal. In front of hundreds of guests, her husband's mistress slaps her across the face, and the man she gave everything to laughs. Cameras flash, people whisper, and she collapses to the floor bleeding. Everyone turns away until one man walks in. The room goes silent because it's her father. Not just any father, a billionaire who built an empire and is about to destroy the man who broke his daughter. What happens next will make you believe in justice again. Stay till the end. Trust me, you'll want to see how the tables turn. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And share this story with someone who loves watching karma served billionaire style. The rain fell softly on Oakwood Cemetery, each drop a whispered prayer against the Connecticut grass that had turned a deeper, richer shade of green. Grace Hartford stood beside her father Richard, her black dress clinging to her slim frame, her eyes fixed on the fresh grave marker that read, Catherine Hartford, beloved wife and mother, 1964 to 2020. The mourners had departed 30 minutes ago, colleagues from Hartford Technologies, society friends her mother had kept at arm's length, distant relatives who appeared only for weddings and funerals. They'd offered their condolences with practiced efficiency, their eyes already looking past the grief toward their next appointments. Now only Grace and Richard Hartford remained, two figures in black against the October sky that seemed to mirror their sorrow. Richard stood rigid as a statue, his 6'2" frame somehow diminished by grief. His silver hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled from running his hands through it. His Tom Ford suit, tailored to perfection, hung on him differently now. He'd lost weight. Grace noticed these things even through her own haze of loss. For 5 full minutes, neither spoke. The only sounds were rain on grass, distant traffic from the highway, and the occasional bird that hadn't yet fled south for winter. Grace's hand found her father's, squeezing gently. His fingers were cold. Finally, Richard broke the silence, his voice flat and businesslike, in that way he had of compartmentalizing emotion into spreadsheets and action items. The foundation will endow a research wing in her name. $50 million. Ovarian cancer research. The best facility in the country. Grace felt something crack inside her chest. She turned to him, rain mixing with the tears that had been falling since the funeral began. Dad, can we just talk about Mom? Not money, not foundations, just Mom. Richard finally looked at her, and for a moment Grace saw past the executive mask to the grief he was trying so desperately to contain. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. The money honors her, Grace. It saves lives. That's how I... His voice cracked like thin ice. That's how I handle this. I need my father, Grace said, her voice breaking on the word father. Not a philanthropist, not a CEO, my father. Richard's jaw worked as he fought for control. I'm trying, Gracie. I don't know how to do this without her. Your mother was the one who knew how to feel things, how to talk about feelings. I just knew how to build companies and make money. Neither do I know how to do this, Grace whispered. But we have each other, don't we? Richard pulled away slightly, straightening his shoulders in that way he did when preparing for a difficult board meeting. Come home. Move back into the estate. Your old room is exactly as you left it. Let me take care of you. It's what your mother would have wanted. Grace felt the familiar frustration rising. Even now, even at their mother's grave, they were falling into the same patterns. Dad, I'm 30 years old. I have my own life, my own apartment. That public defender salary? Richard's voice took on an edge. That apartment in Queens? You're making $60,000 a year when you could be... He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air between them like smoke. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Grace's voice rose despite herself. You think money solves everything, that if you just throw enough dollars at a problem, it disappears. Money is security, Grace. Your mother understood that. She never had to worry about... Grace stepped back as if slapped. Mom understood love. She understood that being there matters more than bank balances. You understand control. You understand transactions. Everything is a business deal to you. Richard flinched visibly. That's not fair, isn't it? Grace heard her voice going cold, distant. You want to help me? Really help me? Let me live my own life. Let me make my own way. Let me prove I'm more than just Richard Hartford's daughter. And this boyfriend of yours? Richard's tone turned glacial. This bartender you've been seeing? Grace felt her spine stiffen. Ethan. His name is Ethan Vale. Fine. Ethan. Richard pulled a folder from inside his coat pocket. The fact that he'd brought it to his wife's funeral said everything about how his mind worked. Grace, I had him looked into. Standard background check. You did what? Grace's voice cracked across the cemetery. He's got $40,000 in student loans from a state school. 3 credit cards maxed out. He's been evicted twice in the past 4 years. Once for non-payment of rent. Once for... Because he's had a hard life, Grace interrupted, her voice fierce. Because he didn't have everything handed to him on a silver platter. Because he's had to work for every single thing he's ever gotten. Richard's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. Grace, please listen to me. I've seen men like him before. In business, in life. Men like him see women like you as a solution to their problems. You're young, beautiful, educated, and yes, you come from money. You're everything he's not, and that makes you a target. Women like me? Grace's voice dripped with sarcasm. You mean women you can't control? Women who make their own choices? I mean women with resources who wanted to see the best in people, who lead with their hearts instead of their heads. It's not a weakness, Grace, but it can be exploited. Grace's voice went cold and final. Ethan loves me for me, not for your money, not for the Hartford name, because I'm not using your money anymore. Richard's face went pale. What are you talking about? My trust fund, the $500 million that's supposed to vest when I turn 35. I'm declining it. I want nothing from the Hartford estate. I'm going to make it on my own. Richard looked like she'd struck him. Grace, that's $500 million. Your mother and I built that for you. It's your security, your future. That's your money, Dad. Your legacy, not mine. I'm going to build my own legacy. I'm going to make it on my own terms. This is insane. Richard's voice rose, something it rarely did. You're throwing away your future for some bartender who's in debt up to his eyeballs. For some romantic notion of proving yourself. For some what, Dad? Grace challenged. Say it. Say what you really think. Richard paused, and in that pause, Grace saw him make a calculation. She saw him decide whether truth or diplomacy served his purpose better. He chose truth. For someone who doesn't deserve you. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, hot against the cold rain. You know what? Mom would have liked him. She would have given him a chance. She would have seen past the bank statements and credit scores to the person underneath. She always said you were too quick to judge people by their balance sheets. Don't you dare use her to justify this. Richard's voice was sharp as broken glass. Why not? She's the one who taught me that love matters more than money, that character matters more than credentials. Everything you seem to have forgotten. Your mother had the luxury of believing that because she married a man who could provide for her. The words hung between them, ugly and true. Grace felt something fundamental break between them. I can't do this. I can't be around you right now. She turned to walk away. Grace, Richard called after her, his voice finally breaking. Gracie, wait. She didn't turn back. Couldn't turn back. If she looked at him now, she might crumble. Grace, his voice was desperate now. Please. She kept walking, her heels sinking slightly into the wet grass with each step. Behind her, she heard her father's voice. Quieter now, talking to the gravestone. I already lost your mother. Don't make me lose her too. But Grace didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She walked through the cemetery gates and didn't look back. The screen faded to black. White text appeared stark against the darkness. 2 years later, Grace Hartford Vale woke alone in their cramped Astoria apartment, sunlight streaming through curtains that didn't quite close properly. At 32 and 7 months pregnant, even the simple act of getting out of bed had become a challenge that required strategy and determination. She rolled to her side first, then pushed herself up with both hands, her belly leading the way like a ship's prow. Everything ached. Her back, her feet, even her fingers were swollen. Standing took effort. Walking to the bathroom took longer than it should have. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, purple-blue like bruises. Her naturally blonde hair showed dark roots nearly 3 inches long because she couldn't afford the $150 for the salon anymore. The worn maternity tank top, third hand from a thrift store, stretched tight over her belly. Everything about her screamed exhaustion, defeat, struggle. This wasn't who she'd imagined becoming. She opened the medicine cabinet with a squeak of rusted hinges. Inside, prenatal vitamins. Generic brand because the name brand was $12 more. Antacids because the baby gave her heartburn constantly now. Anxiety medication prescribed 3 months ago by a doctor at the free clinic for stress and intrusive thoughts. Her phone sat on the counter, screen lighting up with notification after notification. 47 missed calls, all from Dad. She knew without checking that there would be voicemails too. There always were. She scrolled through them, not listening, just reading the preview text. Grace, it's Dad. Please call me back. Sweetheart, I just want to know you're okay. It's your birthday. I miss you. Your mother would have been so proud of who you've become. Grace felt her throat tighten. She touched her belly, feeling the baby kick, and whispered, "Your grandpa's complicated, baby. He means well, but he shows love in all the wrong ways. But you have a daddy who loves you. A daddy who'll be there for you. That's what matters." Even as she said it, she felt the lie of it in her bones. The apartment door opened with his familiar creak that Ethan kept promising to oil but never did. Ethan Vale walked in carrying his gym bag, wearing a designer tracksuit that cost more than their monthly grocery budget. Lululemon, she noticed. Knew he must have bought it this week. He was on his phone as always, his voice animated with that charm he could turn on and off like a switch. "Yeah, tell the client I'll have the proposal by Friday." No, I'm confident we can meet that timeline. The Vale Premium Guarantee." He glanced at Grace like she was furniture. "Hey, you're up." Grace forced brightness into her voice, smiling hopefully. "I made coffee. Well, decaf for me, but I made real coffee for you, and I found those bagels you like on sale." Ethan grabbed his keys from the hook, already moving toward the door again. "Can't. Meeting in Manhattan." Grace felt her smile falter. "Ethan, it's Saturday, and it's our anniversary." He paused mid-motion, and she saw the calculation cross his face, then the realization, then the brief flash of irritation before he covered it with apologetic charm. He rubbed his face with one hand. "Shit, is it today?" Grace tried to hide the hurt, tried to keep her voice light. 5 years married today, October 20th. "Right, yeah, sorry, babe, work's been absolutely crazy. These new contracts, they're demanding. But listen, there's this gala tonight at the plaza, big client networking thing. We'll celebrate there. Make a whole thing of it." Grace lit up, hope flooding through her chest. "Really? Like a date?" "Sure, yeah, wear something nice, okay? Something that—" He looked at her belly, and for just a fraction of a second, disgust flickered across his handsome features. "Something that fits properly." The words hit like ice water. "I'll find something. What time should I meet you?" "Meet me?" He seemed surprised she'd assume otherwise. "Oh, right, 8 p.m., the Grand Ballroom. Text me when you get there." "You're not picking me up? It's our anniversary." Ethan's irritation showed now, barely masked. "I'll already be there setting up, Grace. Networking with the clients. It's easier if you just Uber." "Ethan, an Uber to Manhattan is like $60, $70 with surge pricing. We're trying to save for the baby. So take the subway." "I don't know, Grace. Figure it out. I gotta go." "Wait, Ethan." But he was already halfway out the door, pulling it shut behind him with a decisive click. The apartment felt colder without him in it, which was strange because he'd barely been there at all. Grace stood alone in the kitchen, one hand protectively on her belly, whispering to herself, "Happy anniversary to me." The morning unraveled slowly, each discovery another thread pulled from the fabric of her denial. While cleaning the apartment, trying to make their cramped space feel like a home, Grace found a jewelry receipt in Ethan's jacket pocket. She pulled it out, curious, hoping maybe he'd bought her an anniversary gift after all. Cartier Love Bracelet, $7,500, purchased October 15th. 5 days ago. Grace checked her wrist. Nothing. She looked through her small jewelry box. Nothing. She searched the apartment, thinking maybe he'd hidden it somewhere to surprise her. Nothing. $7,500. They had exactly $1,200 in their joint savings account. Where had he gotten $7,000? Her hands trembling, Grace opened their laptop and logged into their joint credit card account. The statement loaded slowly on their cheap internet connection. The charges scrolled down the screen like an indictment. Mario's Bistro, $237, September 22nd. She'd been home that night eating ramen because she'd felt too nauseated to cook. Le Bernardin, $412, September 29th. She remembered that night he'd said he was working late. Per se, $568. October 8th, one of the most expensive restaurants in New York. She'd called him that night around 9 p.m., and he'd said he was still at the office. All in the past month, $1,200 on restaurant charges, at places she'd never been. On nights he'd claimed to be working. Grace felt nausea rising that had nothing to do with pregnancy. She opened Instagram on her phone, something she rarely did anymore. Social media felt like watching other people's perfect lives while hers fell apart. But she navigated to Ethan's company account, Veil Premium Auto Detailing. The most recent photo stopped her cold. Ethan at a charity gala wearing a new tuxedo she'd never seen. Beside him stood a woman in a red dress that probably cost more than Grace's entire wardrobe. The woman was gorgeous, auburn hair in perfect waves, confident smile, hand resting casually on Ethan's arm. The caption read, Veil Premium with our amazing VP, Sienna Brooks, making connections that matter. 512 likes. Comments scrolling endlessly. Power couple. You two look great together. When's the wedding, LOL? Grace's hand shook as she clicked on more photos. There were dozens. Ethan and Sienna at networking events. Ethan and Sienna at business dinners. Ethan and Sienna always standing just a little too close. She called his office before she could talk herself out of it. Veil Premium, how may I help you? The receptionist's voice was chirpy, young. Grace recognized it vaguely from the Christmas party 2 years ago. Hi, is Ethan available? Mr. Veil is in a meeting with Miss Brooks. A pause. Wow. Again, they've been meeting a lot this week. Should I have him call you back? Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. No, it's okay, thank you. She hung up before the receptionist could respond. The iPad sat on the couch, half buried under throw pillows. Ethan used it for work sometimes, left it at home when he was at the office. Grace picked it up, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't look. Looking was a violation of privacy, of trust. But trust was already broken, wasn't it? The iPad unlocked to Ethan's messages. He'd forgotten to sign out. Grace's finger hovered over the screen, trembling. She clicked on the thread with Sienna Brooks. The messages loaded. Can't wait for tonight. Finally get to show you off properly. No more hiding. What about your wife? Grace's breath caught. She scrolled up, reading more. She won't cause problems. Trust me. She's too proud to make a scene. And even if she does, we have the prenup. But she's pregnant. Exactly. She'll be too distracted with the baby to fight the divorce. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. I feel bad sometimes. Don't. She had her chance at the good life and chose to play poor. She's delusional. She actually thinks sacrifice equals love. It's pathetic. Grace dropped the iPad like it had burned her. She stood up too fast, stumbled, caught herself on the arm of the couch. The room spun. Her reflection in the television screen showed a woman 7 months pregnant, wearing clothes from a thrift store, hair a mess, face pale with shock. Pathetic. The word echoed in her skull. By afternoon, Grace was at the thrift store on Northern Boulevard, the one that smelled like mothballs and broken dreams. She flipped through racks of maternity dresses, each one uglier than the last. Size extra large. Extra, extra large. Nothing fit right. Everything pulled wrong across her belly or hung shapeless on her frame. A saleswoman with kind eyes and worn hands approached. "When are you due, honey?" "2 months?" "First baby?" Grace touched her belly instinctively, protectively. "Yeah." The saleswoman's smile was genuine, warm. "Your husband must be so excited." Grace forced her practiced smile, the one she'd perfected over the past few months when people asked how she was doing. "He is. He's very excited." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She found a dress finally, pale blue, size 18, $22 plus tax. It would have to do. Back home, Grace stood in their tiny bathroom, struggling to zip the dress. It caught halfway up her back. She contorted her arm, trying to reach, feeling the zipper teeth bite into her skin. Finally, it closed. Barely. She did her makeup with shaking hands. Foundation to cover the exhaustion. Mascara to make her eyes look less dead inside. Lipstick in a shade called Hopeful Rose that she'd bought on sale 6 months ago when things had still seemed salvageable. Her phone sat on the counter, no text from Ethan. She typed out a message. "Hey, what's the dress code tonight? Can't wait to celebrate with you. Love you, XO." She watched the message show delivered, then read. The typing indicator appeared for a moment, then disappeared. No response came. Grace stared at her reflection in the mirror. She practiced her smile again. "Hi, I'm Grace, Ethan's wife." The smile looked wrong, desperate, sad. She looked at the simple wedding bands on her finger. Gold plate, not even real gold. They'd cost $98 total from a jewelry store in Queens. She'd chosen them, wanting to seem humble, wanting to prove she didn't need her father's money. She whispered to her reflection, "He loves you. He's just stressed. The baby will fix everything. Once the baby's here, he'll remember why he married you. It'll all be okay." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. Her reflection stared back at her, 7 months pregnant, wearing a thrift store dress, wedding rings that weren't real gold, makeup that couldn't quite hide the truth. She didn't recognize herself anymore. The woman in the mirror wasn't Grace Hartford, summa cum laude from Columbia Law School, daughter of a billionaire, woman who'd turned down $500 million on principle. The woman in the mirror was Grace Vale, broke and pregnant and alone, married to a man who'd called her pathetic in a text to his mistress. The woman in the mirror was everything she'd promised herself she'd never become. The Uber dropped Grace at the corner of 5th Avenue and Central Park South at 7:45 p.m. The Plaza Hotel rose before her, a French Renaissance chateau of white marble and gold trim, its facade lit by spotlights that made it glow against the darkening October sky. Grace struggled out of the car, the driver offering no assistance, already focused on his next pickup. She stood on the sidewalk, one hand pressed to the small of her aching back, the other clutching her small purse. Around her, expensive cars pulled up to the hotel entrance in a steady parade of wealth. A silver Bentley, a black Tesla Model S, a chauffeur-driven Mercedes with windows so dark she couldn't see inside. From each emerged women in designer gowns that probably cost more than Grace had paid in rent for the past year. Valentino, Versace, Oscar de la Renta. She recognized the brands from her old life, the life before she'd rejected her trust fund to prove a point. The valets looked at her twice as she approached, their expressions polite but puzzled. She clearly didn't fit. One valet, young and trying to be kind, offered, "Ma'am, the service entrance is around the side if you're with the catering staff." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm a guest. My husband, Ethan Vale. He's hosting tonight." The valet's expression shifted to poorly concealed surprise. "Of course, ma'am. Welcome to the plaza." Inside the grand ballroom was a vision of old money opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light. Ice sculptures carved into swans and dolphins sat on marble tables. Champagne towers rose in impossible geometric formations, each glass filled with golden bubbles that caught the light. Women glided across the polished floor in gowns that moved like water. Men in custom tuxedos stood in clusters, discussing deals and mergers and market shares. Everyone looked like they belonged to a world Grace had thought she'd left behind, a world she now realized she missed more than she'd ever admitted. Grace scanned the crowd looking for Ethan. Her eyes moved from group to group, face to face, feeling increasingly desperate. Where was he? He'd said 8 p.m., but it was almost that now, and she'd expected him to meet her at the entrance, to introduce her, to make her feel welcome. Then she saw him. Ethan stood at the bar near the far wall, laughing at something someone had said. He looked different in his tuxedo, more polished, more confident, more like he belonged here than he ever had in their queen's apartment. His hand rested on the small of a woman's back. The woman from Instagram, the woman from his text messages, Sienna Brooks. She was even more beautiful in person. Auburn hair fell in perfect waves over bare shoulders. Her red gown was cut to perfection, showing just enough to be alluring without crossing into inappropriate. She wore confidence like jewelry, and it made her radiant. Grace felt something in her chest constrict. This was the competition. This was what Ethan wanted instead of her. She watched them for a long moment, these two beautiful people in their beautiful world, and felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller, less significant, an obstacle to be removed. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Grace began walking toward them. People parted as she approached, staring at her pregnant belly with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. She heard whispers following her like a wake. Who is that? Is she supposed to be here? Oh my God, is she pregnant at the gala? Someone should tell her this isn't appropriate. Each whisper was a small cut. By the time Grace reached Ethan and Sienna, she felt like she was bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds. She touched Ethan's arm, her voice tentative. Ethan? He turned, and Grace watched his face cycle through expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then annoyance, then a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Grace! He didn't call her a term of endearment, didn't say honey or babe like he did at home, just Grace, flat and neutral. Hey, you made it. The phrasing stung. Made it. Like her arrival was uncertain, optional, perhaps even unwanted. Grace tried to smile, confused by his tone. Of course I made it. You invited me. It's our anniversary. 5 years. Awkward silence fell like a curtain. Sienna's eyes moved from Ethan to Grace with barely concealed amusement, a private joke Grace wasn't part of. Oh, Sienna's voice was honey over broken glass. So you're Grace. Grace turned to her, extending her hand automatically, falling back on the social graces her mother had taught her. I'm sorry, have we met? Sienna took her hand with a grip just slightly too firm, her smile just slightly too wide. Sienna Brooks, VP of Client Relations at Vail Premium. Ethan's told me so much about you. The emphasis on so much was deliberate. The way she said Ethan's name was familiar, intimate. Grace kept her voice level. That's funny. He hasn't mentioned you at all. Sienna's smile tightened like a wire pulling taut. Her perfectly manicured fingernails, painted a deep red that matched her dress, tapped once against her champagne glass. Ethan jumped in quickly, his voice artificially bright. Sienna's been instrumental in our expansion this year. She brought in the whole Connecticut corridor. 3 major contracts. We're up 42% from last quarter. That's great, Grace said, though everything about this felt wrong. The way Ethan was standing, the way Sienna was smiling, the way neither of them seemed happy to see her. Ethan, can we talk privately, just for a minute? Ethan checked his expensive watch, a Rolex she'd never seen before. When had he bought that? Where had he gotten the money? Now's not really a good time, Grace. I've got investors to schmooze. The Morgenstern Group is here, and they're considering a partnership that could triple our revenue. It'll just take a minute, Sienna interrupted, her voice dripping with false concern that barely masked contempt. Grace, was it? This is actually a pretty important event for the company. Maybe you could mingle, meet some of the other wives. There's a coat check if you need to sit down. You look tired. The implication was clear. You don't belong here. You're dragging down the atmosphere. You should leave. Grace's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm fine, thank you. Can I talk to my husband, please? The word husband hung in the air, heavy with ownership and desperation. Ethan's jaw tightened. He grabbed Grace's elbow, harder than necessary, pulling her away from the crowd toward an alcove near the windows. His fingers dug into her arm in a way that would leave marks. Jesus, Grace. His voice was low and vicious. What are you doing? What am I doing? Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. What are you doing? Why are you treating me like I'm crashing your party? Keep your voice down. People are watching. Grace looked around. He was right. Faces had turned their direction. Phones were starting to come out. In the age of social media, drama was content, and content was currency. Let them watch. Grace's voice rose despite herself. Ethan, who is she? I told you, she's my VP. I saw the texts on the iPad. Ethan's face went through another rapid transformation. Panic flickered across his features, followed immediately by anger that settled over him like armor. You went through my messages? That's a violation of privacy. That's can't wait to show you off, Grace quoted his own words back to him. She won't cause problems? Were you talking about me? Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, each word precisely articulated with barely controlled rage. You're making a scene, again. This is exactly why I didn't want you here. This is exactly why he stopped himself, but the damage was done. Why you what? Grace demanded. Say it, Ethan. Finish the sentence. You want the truth? Ethan's eyes were cold now, distant. Fine. You're embarrassing me. You show up here looking like... He gestured vaguely at her dress, her belly, her existence. Like this, at a black-tie gala, making a spectacle, proving all their worst assumptions about me were right. What assumptions? That I married up, that I married money, that I'm with you for... Again, he stopped himself. But Grace understood now with a clarity that was almost physical in its impact. She'd always been a means to an end. Her Columbia connections, her father's network, her trust fund that she'd so nobly rejected, not realizing Ethan had been counting on it. You didn't want me at our anniversary celebration? Her voice broke on the words. This isn't an anniversary party. Ethan's voice rose now, losing control. It's a business gala. I just said that so you'd... He stopped, realizing he'd revealed too much. So I'd what? Grace whispered. Stay home? Stay quiet? Stay out of the way? Sienna approached again, either oblivious to or enjoying the tension. Everything okay over here? Ethan, the Morgenstern Group wants to meet you. They're asking about the expansion proposal. Grace felt something snap inside her. Some final thread of patience or hope or denial. She turned to Sienna, voice shaking. Can you give us a minute? Wow. Okay. Hostile. Grace turned back to Ethan, desperate now, her voice breaking. Are you sleeping with her? The question hung in the air like smoke. Nearby guests stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Grace saw phones coming out now, pointed in their direction. She was becoming content. She was becoming a story. Ethan's face went pale. Grace, stop. Answer me, her voice carried across the balcony now. Are you having an affair? You're being paranoid, hormonal. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Don't you dare blame this on hormones. The room had turned toward them now, a circle of well-dressed spectators forming like vultures gathering around something dying. Sienna stepped between them, her voice sharp. Okay, this is completely inappropriate. Ma'am, I think you need to leave. Ma'am? Grace felt hysteria rising. I'm his wife. Sienna's voice was cruel now, all pretense of politeness dropped. A fact he seems to regret bringing up. The words hit like a physical blow. Grace turned back to Ethan, tears streaming down her face now, no longer caring about the audience or the phones or her pride. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm crazy. Tell me there's nothing going on between you. She saw the calculation cross Ethan's face. He looked at Sienna, then back at Grace. Something shifted in his expression. Something cold and final settled over his features like ice forming on a winter pond. You want the truth? His voice was detached now, clinical. Fine, let's do this. Grace felt a flicker of hope, desperate and pathetic. Maybe he would deny it. Maybe he would say she'd misunderstood. Maybe... You were supposed to be temporary, Ethan said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. A nice girl from Colombia who could introduce me to the right people. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Grace felt the words like a physical blow to her chest. What? But then you had to go and be a martyr. Ethan's voice was gaining momentum now, fueled by anger that had apparently been building for years. Cut off your trust fund, play poor, reject your father's money to prove some idiotic point about being independent, and I was stuck with you. I gave you everything. Grace's voice broke. Ethan laughed, and it was the cruelest sound Grace had ever heard. You gave me $50,000 and a list of rich friends. Congratulations. But the business? That's mine. The success? Mine. You were just the entry ticket, the pretty girl from the right school who opened the right doors. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones were definitely filming now. This was going viral. Grace could feel it. And the baby? Her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan looked at her pregnant belly with unconcealed disgust. A mistake that's about to cost me a lot of money. In child support, in alimony, in everything. You trapped me, and now I'm going to pay for it for the next 18 years. More gasps. Someone said, "Oh my God." Someone else said, "Is this really happening?" Grace's hand moved before she could think. She slapped him hard across his face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot. Ethan stumbled back, touching his cheek, shock replacing cruelty. His eyes widened. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Then Sienna stepped forward, her voice shaking with rage that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "You don't get to put your hands on him." Grace turned to her, adrenaline flooding her system. "Stay out of this." "No." Sienna's voice was cold. "You stay out of this." Sienna slapped Grace hard across the face. The crack echoed through the ballroom. Grace felt her head snap to the side. Pain exploded across her cheek. For a moment, everything went white. Everyone gasped. Phones came up like a field of electronic flowers, all pointed at her, capturing her humiliation, her pain, her destruction. Grace stumbled backward, off balance, her pregnant belly throwing off her center of gravity. She hit a cocktail table. Champagne glasses shattered, crystal exploding across the marble floor. She fell to one knee, clutching her belly with both hands. She looked up at Ethan, waiting for him to help, waiting for him to remember he was her husband, waiting for him to remember they'd once loved each other. Ethan looked down at her, his expression unreadable, and then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh, a cruel, delighted laugh that carried across the silent ballroom like a death knell. "See what I deal with?" He addressed the crowd like he was performing at a comedy club. "Pregnancy hormones, folks. 1 minute they're crying, the next minute they're violent. Am I right?" Some guests laughed. Nervous, uncomfortable, but they laughed. Grace heard them, each laugh another nail in her coffin. Ethan, her voice was small, broken. She looked down and saw blood. Dark red spreading across the pale blue fabric of her thrift store dress. Blood seeping between her legs. Oh God. Panic seized her. The baby. Something's wrong with the baby. She collapsed fully, curling around her belly, trying to protect the life inside her even as her own was falling apart. The crowd gasped again, louder now. Someone shouted, "Call 911, Shane." Sienna backed away, her bravado cracking, reality setting in. "I didn't. She came at me first. Everyone saw that, right? She assaulted him first. I was defending him." Everyone saw. Ethan turned to security guards who'd appeared at the edges of the crowd. "Get her out of here. She's causing a scene." This is exactly the kind of drama I was trying to avoid. A woman in the crowd, an older woman in diamonds and pearls, spoke up with horror in her voice. "She's bleeding. She's pregnant. Someone help her." Ethan was dismissive, waving a hand like swatting a fly. "She's fine." "She's always dramatic. Trust me, I live with this. It's all for attention." But the blood was real. The blood was spreading. The blood said this wasn't drama. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes, pushing through the crowd with professional efficiency. They knelt beside Grace, who was semi-conscious now, curled around her belly, whimpering. "Ma'am, can you hear me? How far along are you?" Grace's voice was dazed, distant. 7 months. Is my baby okay? Please tell me my baby's okay. We need to get her to the hospital now. Sir, are you the father? The paramedic was looking at Ethan. Ethan straightened his tuxedo, checking his appearance. Yes, but I'll meet her there. I have to close out the event first. There are investors here who... The first paramedic's voice was firm, commanding. Sir, your wife is having a medical emergency. She needs you. I understand that, but I have responsibilities here. She'll be fine. She's tough. This isn't the first time she's made a scene for attention. They were loading Grace onto a stretcher now, starting an IV, taking vitals, moving with practiced speed. Grace reached toward Ethan, her voice desperate, childlike. Ethan, please come with me. I'm scared. He leaned in close, and for a moment Grace thought he might actually care. Then he whispered, quiet enough that only she could hear. Stop embarrassing me. He stepped back. The paramedics closed the ambulance doors. The last thing Grace saw before the doors shut completely was Ethan turning back to Sienna, putting his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the ambulance pull away like it was taking out the garbage. Inside the ambulance, the world reduced to sirens and beeping monitors and the paramedic's calm voice asking questions Grace could barely process. Ma'am, is there anyone else we can call? Family? Friends? Grace looked at her phone through tears that wouldn't stop falling. She scrolled through her contacts with shaking fingers. Friends from law school. She hadn't talked to them in over a year. They'd all gone to big law firms, making $300,000 a year, while she'd chosen the public defender's office at $60,000. They drifted apart, or maybe she'd pushed them away, ashamed of her choices. Colleagues from work, acquaintance, not friends, people who'd been polite but distant, especially once she'd gotten pregnant. Mom, deceased 2 years, dumb, blocked number. Her thumb hovered over Dad for a long moment. Pride stopped her. 2 years of silence. 2 years of proving she could make it on her own. 2 years of being right, of showing him she didn't need his money or his control or his conditional love. And where had it gotten her? Bleeding in an ambulance, alone, while her husband attended a party? Just me, she whispered to the paramedic. There's just me. Ma'am, your blood pressure is dropping. We really need to know if there's anyone. Grace's voice was hollow, empty. There's no one. I don't have anyone. The sound design around her intensified. The heartbeat monitor's steady beep, the siren wailing, her own labored breathing. The city passing by outside in blurs of light and darkness. The paramedic held her hand, a stranger showing more compassion than her own husband. Grace stared at the ceiling of the ambulance, watching the lights pass by through the windows, and thought about how she'd gotten here. She remembered the first time she'd met Ethan, her law school graduation party at a bar in Manhattan. He'd been bartending, charming, making everyone laugh. He'd had that smile, that easy confidence, that way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He'd told her his story, growing up poor in Jersey City, father a mechanic, mother a waitress, working his way through state school, loans piling up, but never giving up on his dreams. He'd wanted to start his own business, he'd said. He just needed a chance. Grace had seen someone self-made, someone who understood struggle, someone the opposite of all the trust fund kids at Columbia. She'd fallen for the story. She'd fallen for him. Now, bleeding in an ambulance, she realized she'd fallen for a carefully crafted performance. She'd been a mark, a target, exactly what her father had tried to warn her about at her mother's funeral. The ambulance pulled up to Mount Sinai Hospital. They rushed her inside, through automatic doors, down fluorescent-lit hallways that all looked the same. The last thing Grace saw before they sedated her was a poster on the emergency room wall. Domestic violence hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. She thought hysterically that emotional abuse wasn't on the poster. Financial abuse wasn't listed. Humiliation wasn't mentioned. Then the sedative hit, and everything went dark. Grace woke in a hospital bed, fluorescent lights harsh against her eyes. Dr. Reynolds stood at the foot of her bed reading a chart, his face professional but concerned. Mrs. Vale. Not Grace. Mrs. Vale. Her married name that felt like chains now. The bleeding has stopped, but you've had a placental abruption, partial separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. Your baby is stable for now, but this is serious. You need complete bed rest. Any stress, any physical trauma could trigger preterm labor. Do you understand? Grace's hand went to her belly. Is my baby okay? For now, yes, but you need to be very careful. No stress, no physical exertion. No, he paused, choosing his words. No altercations. Can I go home? Dr. Reynolds looked up from the chart. We want to keep you overnight for observation. Possibly longer. Grace felt panic rising. I can't afford that. Your insurance will. I don't have insurance. The realization hit her as she said it. My husband's plan, he said he'd add me, but he never did. Did he? The silence confirmed what she already knew. We'll work something out, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice kind. Right now, you need rest. A nurse entered, her expression apologetic. Mrs. Vale, there's someone here to see you. Grace felt hope flare, pathetic and desperate. Ethan? No, ma'am, a process server. The hope died instantly, replaced by cold dread. A man in his 30s entered, holding a manila envelope, his expression professionally apologetic. Grace Hartford Vale? Yes. You've been served. I'm sorry. He dropped the envelope on her hospital bed and left quickly, probably trained not to linger during emotional reactions. Grace opened it with shaking hands. The paper rustled in the quiet room. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She read aloud, her voice breaking with each word. Filed by Ethan James Vale on October 15th. She looked up at nothing, doing the math. That was 3 weeks ago. He filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. Before the gala, before tonight's humiliation. He'd been planning this. She kept reading, each line another knife to her heart. Petitioner seeks full custody due to respondent's mental instability and history of erratic behavior. What? Her voice cracked across the hospital room. Petitioner claims separate property ownership of Vale Premium Auto Detailing as business was established through petitioner's sole efforts. Grace spoke to herself, numb with shock. He's claiming I had nothing to do with it. He's taking the business I funded. The business built on my contacts, my connections, my Columbia network. Her eyes scanned further down the document, then stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. Petitioner requests paternity test as respondent has given petitioner reason to doubt paternity of unborn child. She couldn't finish reading it aloud. The words were too ugly, too cruel. He's saying the baby might not be his, she whispered. She dropped the papers. Her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't hold them. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Ethan, don't try to contact me. All communication goes through my lawyer now. His contact information is in the documents. Lose this number. Grace stared at the phone. Then she screamed. It was primal, guttural. The sound of everything breaking at once. The sound of a woman who'd lost everything. The sound of realization and betrayal and despair all compressed into one inhuman cry. Nurses rushed in. Ma'am, you need to calm down. You're going to hurt the baby. But Grace couldn't stop. She screamed until her throat was raw, until they sedated her, until the world went mercifully dark again. When she woke, it was 3 a.m. The hospital was quiet except for distant beeping monitors and hushed voices at the nurse's station. Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone clutched in one hand. She made herself look, made herself see what her humiliation had become. Twitter was trending. She opened the app with dread pooling in her stomach. Hashtag Plaza Slap. Hashtag Pregnant Karen. Hashtag Entitled Wife. The video was everywhere. Someone if all had filmed the whole thing. The slap. Her falling. The blood. And worst of all, Ethan laughing. His voice saying, "Pregnancy hormones, folks." The comments scrolled past like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She totally deserved it. You can't assault someone and not expect consequences. Pregnancy hormones, LMAU, that man is a savage. Why is she even at a business event dressed like that? Did she think a thrift store dress was appropriate? Attention seeker. Probably faked the blood for sympathy. Feel bad for the husband. She seems absolutely psychotic. Rich girl playing poor to trap a man. Disgusting. Each comment was a blow. Each share was another person witnessing her destruction. Her humiliation was entertainment now. Content, clicks, revenue for social media platforms. She found Sienna's interview, already at 500,000 views after just 3 hours. An interviewer with perfect hair and practiced sympathy leaned in. Sienna, you're trending right now. Tell us what happened at the plaza tonight. Sienna cried perfectly for the camera, mascara running in aesthetically pleasing lines. I've been working with Ethan for 8 months. His wife, Grace, she's been increasingly paranoid, calling the office, showing up unannounced. Tonight, she showed up uninvited to a business event. Grace whispered at the screen, I was invited. It was our anniversary. But no one could hear her. Her voice didn't matter. Sienna's narrative was already set, and she attacked Ethan in front of everyone, physically assaulted him. I stepped in to protect him, and she came at me. I defended myself. And now she's trying to make me the villain because I'm younger and more successful. The interviewer gasped on cue. There are rumors she's from a very wealthy family. Oh, she's loaded. Sienna's tears disappeared momentarily, replaced by indignation. Daughter of Richard Hartford, the tech billionaire, worth like $8 billion or something insane. But she's been playing poor this whole time, manipulating Ethan. She got pregnant deliberately to trap him. Classic rich girl move. They think they can buy anything, including people. The narrative was set. Grace was the villain, the entitled rich girl who'd trapped a hardworking entrepreneur. Never mind that she'd given up her trust fund. Never mind that she'd funded his business. Never mind the truth. The truth didn't matter. The story mattered. New headlines appeared. Billionaire heiress fakes poverty to trap entrepreneur husband. Grace Hartford veil when rich girls play poor. The Plaza incident, entitled wife gets reality check. Her phone buzzed. An email from her employer. Subject, immediate termination. Dear Miss Hartford Vale, in light of recent events and the negative publicity surrounding your personal affairs, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. Your actions reflect poorly on our office and undermine our credibility with clients. Please collect your personal belongings during non-business hours. Security has been notified. Another buzz, a text from her landlord, Jerry, who'd always been kind before. Grace, I saw the news. I need you out by end of month. Can't have this kind of attention on my building. Other tenants are uncomfortable. Sorry. Another buzz. Bank alert. Your account has been frozen due to suspicious activity. Please contact your branch manager during business hours. Ooh, Grace checked her banking app with numb fingers. Joint account, $0, 0 cents. Her personal savings account, closed. He took everything, she whispered to the empty hospital room. She scrolled through her phone one final time. Her contacts list told the story of her isolation. Mom, deceased. Dad, blocked. Law school friends, hadn't spoken in over a year. Public defender colleagues, professional relationships only. College roommates, lost touch after graduation. No one. She had no one. Her screen landed on Dad, blocked. Grace stared at that contact for a long time. Her thumb hovered over it, trembling. Flashbacks came unbidden. Her father at her Columbia graduation, tears in his eyes, so proud. Him trying to hug her at Mom's funeral while she'd pulled away, choosing anger over comfort. His voicemails she'd never listened to, just deleted. His calls she'd ignored. His attempts to reach out that she'd rebuffed with self-righteous pride. 2 years of silence. 2 years of proving she didn't need him. 2 years of being right at any cost. And where had it gotten her, bleeding in a hospital bed, broke and jobless and homeless? Married to a man who called her a mistake. Pregnant with a baby whose father was trying to deny paternity. Her internal voice said, he'll say I told you so. He'll make me feel like a failure. He'll try to control everything again. But another voice, quieter, more honest. But my baby. I have to protect my baby. Pride doesn't keep you warm. Pride doesn't pay hospital bills. Pride doesn't protect the life inside you. Her hands shook as she clicked unblock. The contact changed from Dad, blocked, to just Dad. She stared at the call button like it was a loaded gun. Every reason not to call lined up in her mind. Pride, shame, fear of judgment, fear of hearing "I told you so," fear of admitting she'd been catastrophically wrong. But her baby kicked, a reminder of what mattered. Grace took a deep breath, then another. Then she pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, three times. Grace almost hung up. Then, "Grace?" Richard's voice was rough, immediately awake despite the hour. "Gracie, is that you?" Grace opened her mouth. No sound came out. Her throat had closed with emotion. "Grace, talk to me. Are you okay? What's wrong? Where are you?" Her voice, when it came, was tiny, childlike, broken. "Daddy?" She heard him choke up, something she'd heard maybe twice in her entire life. "Oh, baby girl. Oh, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm right here. I've got you." Grace started sobbing, 2 years of pain and pride and stubbornness breaking like a dam. "I'm so sorry. You were right about everything, about Ethan, about the money, about all of it. I was so stupid, so incredibly stupid." "No." Richard's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare. Where are you right now?" "Mount Sinai Hospital." The baby, I almost lost. And Ethan, he..." The words wouldn't come properly. They tumbled out broken and jagged. "Grace, listen to me." Richard's voice was steady, anchoring. "Are you safe right now? Are you in danger?" "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have money. I don't have a job. I don't have..." She couldn't finish. "I'm coming. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make any decisions. I'm 20 minutes away." "You're in Connecticut. I'm already in the car. I've been driving around Manhattan looking for you for the past 3 hours." Grace was confused through her tears. "How did you know?" "I saw the video, the Plaza video, 3 hours ago when someone tagged me on Twitter. I've been calling every hospital in New York trying to find you." "Hold on, sweetheart. Daddy's coming." The call ended. Grace lay in the hospital bed, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone, and cried. But this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Help was coming. She wasn't alone anymore. At 4:17 in the morning, Grace heard commotion in the hospital corridor. Raised voices. A nurse saying, "Sir, visiting hours don't start until..." Then her father's voice, sharp with command and barely controlled panic. "Which room is Grace Hartford?" "My daughter, tell me now." "I can't give out patient information." "I'm Richard Hartford." A pause, the sound of a wallet opening. "That's my driver's license. That's my daughter. Now tell me where she is, or I will buy this hospital before sunrise and fire everyone on this floor." The threat wasn't empty. Grace knew her father well enough to know he meant every word. "Room 412, Mr. Hartford." Grace heard running footsteps. Then her door burst open. Richard Hartford stood in the doorway, and Grace barely recognized him. His silver hair was disheveled, standing up in places where he'd run his hands through it. He wore suit pants and a cashmere sweater thrown on in obvious haste. No jacket, no tie. His feet were in dress shoes with no socks. His face was haggard, older than she remembered, lined with worry and fear and 2 years of grief. Behind him, 3 security personnel hovered, professional and alert. Richard's eyes found her in the hospital bed, and Grace watched him take in every detail. The hospital gown, the bruise forming on her cheek, purple and yellow in the fluorescent light, her pregnant belly under the thin blanket, the IV in her arm, the monitors beeping steadily. They stared at each other across 2 years of silence and stubbornness and pride. Grace's voice came out as a whisper. "Hi, Dad." Richard crossed the room in 3 strides. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, careful of the IV, but holding her like she might disappear if he let go. His sweater smelled like his cologne, familiar and safe, a scent from her childhood that meant protection and home. "I've got you," he said, his voice shaking. "I've got you now. You're safe. You're safe now." Grace sobbed into his shoulder. 2 years of pretending to be fine. 2 years of struggling alone. 2 years of pride and pain, and all breaking at once. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Shh." Richard stroked her hair like he used to when she was little and had nightmares. No apologies. Not now, not ever. You have nothing to apologize for. But I was so stupid, so stubborn. You tried to warn me and Grace. He pulled back, holding her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that had made her throat tight. Listen to me. You were young and idealistic and in love. Those aren't crimes. He's the one who lied. He's the one who used you. He's the one who should be apologizing, not you. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter, finally together again. Then Richard pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face with the careful attention of someone cataloging injuries. His finger traced near the bruise on her cheek, not touching it, just hovering close. Did he do this to you? No, his girlfriend, Grace's voice was flat. Sienna Brooks, she slapped me. At the plaza. In front of everyone. Richard's jaw clenched so hard Grace could see the muscles jumping. His eyes went cold in a way she'd only seen once before, when a business partner had tried to embezzle from Hartford Technologies. That partner had lost everything within a week. Grace's words came in a rush now, everything spilling out. Dad, he took everything, the business I paid for with my savings. Our bank accounts, he emptied them. He's claiming the baby might not be his. He filed for divorce 3 weeks ago, and I didn't even know. He's saying I'm mentally unstable. He's trying to get full custody before the baby's even born. Stop. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. Breathe, sweetheart. One thing at a time. I have nothing. No home. They fired me. No apartment. My landlord evicted me. No money. He took it all. I don't even have health insurance. He never added me to his plan. Dad, I have nothing. You have me. Richard's voice was absolute, final. You have always had me, even when we weren't speaking, even when you blocked my number, even when you told me you never wanted to see me again. You have always had me. I can't just take your money again, Grace started, old pride rising. Richard cut her off, his voice firm. This isn't about money, Grace. This is about my daughter and my grandchild being safe and protected and cared for. This is about family. This is about everything your mother taught me before she died. Mom would have been so disappointed in me, Grace whispered. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Your mother would have been so proud of you for following your heart, for trying to make it on your own, for fighting for what you believed in. She would have been furious at him, not you. Never you. I was so stubborn. I pushed you away, and I let you. Richard's voice broke. I should have tried harder. I should have shown up at your apartment. I should have fought for you the way your mother would have. She would have known how to reach you. I just knew how to send money and voicemails. Grace managed a sad smile through her tears. Mom would have told me Ethan was a snake from the beginning. Richard returned the smile, equally sad. She was a much better judge of character than me. She saw through business deals and balance sheets to the person underneath. I never learned that skill. After a pause, Grace's voice went small again. He's going to get away with this, isn't he? He's already changed the story. Social media believes him, leaves. Everyone thinks I'm the crazy one. The entitled rich girl who trapped a poor man. That's the narrative now. Richard's voice went dangerously calm, the tone he used in boardrooms before destroying competitors. No, he's not going to get away with anything. Dad, he has lawyers. So do I. Better ones, the best in New York. The business is in his name. Funded with your money, marital asset. Under New York law, you're entitled to at least half. He's claiming I was mentally unstable. We have a video of him laughing while you bled on a ballroom floor, while pregnant with his child. We have witnesses, we have evidence. What are you? Grace started to ask. Richard turned to the security chief standing in the doorway. The man was tall, African-American, probably late 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in law enforcement. Marcus, I need everything. Financial records going back to when they got married. Security footage from the plaza, all angles. Witness statements from everyone at that gala. Background checks on everyone in Ethan Vale's life. Phone records if we can get them legally. Bank account information, business records, tax returns. I want to know every penny he's made, every lie he's told, every corner he's cut. And I want it done legally, by the book. No shortcuts. Nothing that can be thrown out in court. Can you do that? Marcus Sullivan nodded once, crisp and professional. Already started, sir. I pulled the plaza security footage 2 hours ago. The hotel manager is an old friend from my FBI days. We have 8 camera angles. The assault is clear. The abandonment is clear. The kiss between him and the mistress after the ambulance left is crystal clear. Richard turned back to Grace, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not anger, not rage, something colder, more calculated, more dangerous. Get some rest, he said, his voice gentle again. When you wake up, we're going to war. I don't want war, Dad. Grace's voice was exhausted. I just want my baby to be safe. I just want this to be over. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. Those are the same things, sweetheart. To keep your baby safe, we have to win this war. And we will win, because I didn't spend 30 years building a billion-dollar company to watch my daughter and grandchild be destroyed by a con artist bartender. Grace felt her eyes closing, exhaustion and medication pulling her under. Dad, I'm right here. Don't leave. Never again. I promise you. Never again. As Grace drifted towards sleep, she felt her father's hand holding hers, solid and real and there. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel alone. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the hospital window and the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the hospital cafeteria kind. She opened her eyes to find her father sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching her with concern. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I got hit by a truck, Grace admitted. But better. Knowing you're here makes everything better. I'm not going anywhere. Richard stood, stretching. Grace noticed he'd changed clothes at some point. Clean suit, fresh shirt, but his face still showed exhaustion. I've set up a conference room down the hall. My team arrived an hour ago. Are you strong enough to join us? You don't have to if you're not ready. I need to, Grace said. I need to know everything. 20 minutes later, a nurse wheeled Grace down the corridor in a wheelchair, IV stand attached, hospital gown covered by a robe her father had somehow acquired. Richard walked beside her, one hand on her shoulder. They entered a private conference room on the hospital's executive floor. Richard had clearly thrown money at the problem, turning a sterile meeting space into a command center overnight. Around the large table sat 4 people. Sarah Mitchell, a woman in her 50s wearing a perfectly tailored Armani suit, stood as they entered. Grace, I'm Sarah Mitchell. I've been your father's attorney for 15 years. I specialize in high-stakes divorces and asset recovery. I'm going to destroy your husband. Her tone was matter-of-fact, professional, like discussing the weather. Marcus Sullivan, the security chief, nodded at Grace. We met briefly last night, ex-FBI, 15 years. Now I handle security and investigations for Hartford Technologies. I've already pulled together everything we need on Ethan Vale. Patricia Jones, an African-American woman in her 40s with sharp eyes behind designer glasses, smiled warmly. Forensic accountant, I follow money trails. Your husband tried to hide assets. He wasn't very good at it. The 4th person, a younger woman in her 30s, stood nervously. I'm Jennifer Hayes, PR consultant. I'm here to manage the media narrative. Right now, social media thinks you're the villain. We're going to change that story. Grace felt overwhelmed. This is a lot. This is necessary, Richard said firmly. Sit, listen, then decide how you want to proceed. Sarah took control of the meeting, spreading documents across the table like a general planning a campaign. Okay, here's what we have. Grace, you gave Ethan $50,000 to start Vale Premium Auto Detailing 5 years ago, correct? Yes, Grace confirmed, her voice weak. My entire savings from 3 years of working. And you were married when the business started? Yes, we got married 6 months before he opened the business. Sarah smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Perfect. Under New York marital law, that makes it joint property. You're entitled to half of everything, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. But his name is on all the business documents, Grace protested. He made sure of that. Doesn't matter. Community property estate. You funded it. You introduced clients. According to his own website, which we archived last night, The business was founded with the generous support of his wife. He can't claim sole ownership when he publicly acknowledged your contribution. Patricia spoke up, sliding a financial report across the table. More than half, actually. I've been through his books. Vale Premium is currently valued at $8.2 million. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. $8 million. That's impossible. 5 years ago, it was me and him in a garage in Queens detailing cars. 3 major contracts in the last 6 months alone, Patricia explained, pointing to numbers on her spreadsheet. All from clients you introduced him to, your former classmates from Columbia Law School. I have the emails, the introductions, everything. You built his network. He just exploited it. Richard's voice was cold. He built his empire on your connections and your money, then tried to erase you from the story completely. Marcus hit a button on a remote. A large screen on the wall lit up with multiple video feeds, and then he tried to destroy you publicly. I've got the plaza's security footage, all 8 camera angles. Watch. The footage played in painful clinical detail. Grace arriving alone, struggling out of the Uber, clearly uncomfortable and out of place. Ethan seeing her enter, his face showing clear annoyance, then anger, then calculation. Sienna and Ethan whispering together before Grace approached, obviously discussing her. The confrontation. Every word caught on the hotel's audio system. The slap. Grace's hand hitting Ethan's face. Then Sienna's slap, clearly harder, clearly more violent. Grace obviously pregnant and vulnerable. Grace falling, hitting the table, champagne glasses shattering. Ethan laughing. His voice. Pregnancy hormones, folks. Grace collapsing, blood spreading across her dress. Ethan telling security to remove her. And finally, the smoking gun. After the ambulance left, Ethan pulling Sienna into a passionate kiss, both of them smiling like they'd won something. Grace watched herself get slapped, watched herself fall, watched her husband laugh. Even knowing it had happened, seeing it from these angles was brutal. She looked so small, so pathetic, so alone. God, she whispered, touching her cheek. I look so pathetic. Richard's voice was firm. You look like a woman who was assaulted while 7 months pregnant. There's a difference. You look like a victim, Grace, which is exactly what you are. Sarah slid more documents across the table. Marcus also pulled Ethan's phone records, legally obtained through a friendly judge who fast-tracked our discovery motion. He's been texting Sienna for 6 months, explicitly romantic messages, including detailed discussions about waiting until after the divorce to go public with their relationship. Grace picked up the printouts with shaking hands. She read one text message aloud, her voice hollow. Just 2 more months and she'll be fat and distracted with the baby. That's when we file. She won't see it coming. Another message, this one from Sienna. What if she fights it? Ethan's response. She won't. She's too proud to ask her father for help. She'll just disappear quietly, maybe move back to Connecticut with her tail between her legs. By the time she figures out what happened, it'll be too late. Grace felt sick. He planned this. While I was buying baby clothes and painting the nursery, he was planning to abandon me. Patricia added another document. It gets worse. He's been moving money offshore for 4 months. Cayman Islands accounts. Already transferred $1.2 million. That's illegal, Grace. That's wire fraud and tax evasion. Richard stated flatly. Federal crimes. Sarah nodded. Yes, and actionable. We've already contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They were very interested. Richard leaned forward, looking at Grace intently. This is your choice, sweetheart. I can fund this war for as long as it takes. I can hire the best lawyers in the country. I can destroy him financially and criminally. But I need to know, do you want to destroy him, or do you just want to get what's rightfully yours? Grace thought about it for a long moment. She thought about Ethan's laugh, his cruelty, his text messages, the way he'd looked at her pregnant belly with disgust, the way he'd walked away while she bled. I want him to feel what I felt, she said finally, her voice steady. Small, powerless, betrayed, humiliated. I want him to understand what he did. Richard smiled and Grace recognized the expression from boardroom battles. That's my girl. Sarah turned to the next issue. Now the mistress. Sienna Brooks. She committed assault on camera. That's criminal charges. Assault of a pregnant woman carries enhanced penalties in New York. Grace surprised at everyone. She was manipulated. He lied to her too. Richard's voice was hard. She slapped you while you were 7 months pregnant. She could have caused you to lose your baby. I know. Grace's voice was firm. But she's not the real enemy. She's a victim too, in a way. Ethan lied to her about me, about our marriage, about everything. She thought she was defending someone she loved. Sarah considered this. She's also been doing multiple interviews on social media, painting you as an unhinged rich girl. That's defamation. We can sue her into bankruptcy. Marcus added, want me to dig into her background? Find leverage we can use? Grace shook her head. No, I want to talk to her, woman to woman. Everyone looked at Grace like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not, Richard started. Grace cut him off. Dad, listen to me. She needs to know what he really is. If we just destroy her legally, she'll be another victim, and she'll always believe Ethan's version of events. But if she knows the truth, if she understands how he manipulated both of us, she might help us. She's seen things, heard things, knows things that could be valuable. Sarah nodded slowly, recognition dawning. That's actually strategically brilliant. If she flips, if she testifies against him, we have insider testimony about his planning, his lies, his character. Her word combined with the evidence we already have would be devastating. Richard was skeptical. And if she doesn't flip? If she's loyal to him? Grace's answer was simple. Then we bury her legally, like you said, but we try compassion first. Mom would have wanted that. The mention of Catherine Hartford hung in the air. Richard's expression softened. Your mother always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Sienna deserves a chance to do the right thing, Grace said. Everyone deserves that chance. Marcus spoke up. I might have something that could help. According to my research, Sienna Brooks started working at Hartford Technologies 8 months ago. She was your father's executive assistant. He trusted her. He sent her to quietly check on you a few times. Grace turned to her father, shocked. You had her checking on me? Richard looked uncomfortable. I was worried about you. We weren't speaking. I hired her specifically because she seemed trustworthy and discreet. I asked her to occasionally verify you were okay without you knowing. That's how she met Ethan, Grace realized. You introduced them. Richard's face went pale. Oh God, Grace, I'm so sorry. I never meant... It's not your fault, Grace said firmly, but it means she betrayed you too, Dad. You trusted her, paid her well, gave her responsibility, and she used that access to infiltrate our family for Ethan's benefit. Sarah made a note. That's actually useful. Breach of fiduciary duty. Corporate espionage, potentially. If she shared any confidential information about Hartford Technologies with Ethan, that's a criminal act. Marcus added, I can check her work computer, her emails, her access logs. If she gave Ethan anything proprietary, do it, Richard said, his voice cold. But Grace is right. We give her one chance to do the right thing, then we destroy her if she refuses. Grace took a deep breath. Set up a meeting, neutral ground, just me and her. Give me 1 hour to try to reach her. I'm sending Marcus, Richard said firmly. He stays in the room. Not negotiable. Grace nodded. That was fair. Jennifer, the PR consultant, spoke up. While you're handling the legal strategy, we need to address the social media narrative. Right now, Twitter thinks you're an entitled Karen who assaulted her husband and deserved to be slapped. We need to change that story before this goes to court. How? Grace asked. Jennifer smiled. Press conference. Your father is Richard Hartford, billionaire tech CEO. That gives us a platform. We show the security footage. We present the financial evidence. We let you tell your story, and we make Ethan Vale the villain he actually is. I don't want to be on camera, Grace protested. I don't want to be a public spectacle. You're already a public spectacle, Jennifer said bluntly. The Plaza video has 12 million views and counting. You're trending on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. The question isn't whether you're going to be public. The question is whether you're going to control the narrative or let Ethan control it. Richard added, "She's right, sweetheart. Right now, he's winning the PR battle. We have truth on our side, but truth doesn't matter if no one hears it." Grace looked around the table at all these people her father had assembled. Lawyers, investigators, accountants, PR specialists, an army mobilized overnight to protect her and her baby. "Okay," she said finally, "we do it all. The meeting with Sienna, the press conference, the legal war, everything, but we do it right, legally, ethically, completely." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what your father said you'd say. You're more like him than you realize." Grace looked at her father, seeing him clearly for the first time in years, not as a controlling billionaire, but as a father who'd spent 2 years respecting her wishes even when it killed him, who'd kept tabs on her from a distance to make sure she was safe, who'd dropped everything the moment she needed him. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly. Richard took her hand. "That's what family does, Gracie. We fight for each other. Always." The coffee shop was in Midtown, neutral ground away from Hartford Technologies and Vail Premium's offices. Grace had chosen it deliberately, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough to have a real conversation. She sat at a corner table, Marcus Sullivan positioned 10 feet away at the counter, pretending to read a newspaper but watching everything. Grace's hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Decaf, of course. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anxiety. Sienna Brooks walked in at exactly 2 p.m., punctual if nothing else. She wore a navy pantsuit, professional and polished, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying. She spotted Grace and her posture went immediately defensive, shoulders hunched, arms crossed. She approached the table and stood, not sitting. "You have a lot of nerve asking me here." Grace's voice was calm. "Sit, please." Sienna hesitated, glancing at Marcus, then back at Grace. Finally, she sat, perching on the edge of the chair like she might bolt at any moment. Long silence stretched between them. Grace let it sit, watching Sienna squirm. "I didn't mean to hurt your baby," Sienna finally said, and Grace heard genuine distress in her voice. "But you meant to hurt me," Grace replied evenly. "You attacked Ethan." Grace cut her off. "I slapped him after he publicly called me a mistake and said our baby was going to cost him money. Did he mention that part when he told you his version?" Sienna faltered. "He said you were unstable, that you'd trapped him with the pregnancy, that you were controlling and manipulative." "Did he tell you I gave him $50,000 to start his business?" Grace slid a folder across the table. "That every major client he has came through my connections?" Sienna opened the folder slowly. Inside were bank records, clearly marked and organized. Wire transfer from Grace Hartford to Ethan Vale, $50,000 dated 5 years ago. Business registration documents showing the company founded 2 weeks later. Email introductions from Grace to Columbia classmates, dozens of them. Each one opening doors for Vail Premium. Sienna read through them, her face showing dawning horror. "He said he built it himself, that he worked his way up from nothing, that you just took credit for his success." "He lied." Grace's voice was gentle now, not accusatory. "About me, about the business, probably about a lot of things." Sienna looked up, mascara starting to run. "Did he tell you he filed for divorce 3 weeks before the gala?" "No." Sienna's voice was barely a whisper. "He said he was waiting until after the baby was born, that he wanted to do it properly, humanely. He was going to leave me with a newborn and nothing. Were you part of that plan?" "I didn't know," Sienna's voice broke. "But you suspected," Grace said quietly. "Didn't you? Something didn't add up." Long pause. Sienna's hands twisted in her lap. "Sometimes he'd say things that contradicted other things. About money, about timelines. About you, I had asked him to clarify, and he'd get angry, say I was being paranoid like you. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the red flags." "So did I," Grace admitted. "For 5 years. I wanted to believe he loved me for me, not for what I could give him. I wanted to believe I'd proven my father wrong. I wanted the fairy tale." Sienna looked at her with something like understanding. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're making the same mistake I did. You think love means loyalty even when someone treats you like garbage. even when the evidence is right in front of you. He doesn't treat me, Sienna started. Doesn't he? Grace interrupted. Sienna, you slapped a pregnant woman for him in front of 200 people. And where is he right now? Sienna's face crumpled. He hasn't called since that night. 4 days and he hasn't called once. Because he's using you too, Grace said, not unkindly. You worked for my father. You had access to Hartford Technology's internal systems, client lists, proprietary information. That's why Ethan wanted you. Horror crossed Sienna's face. Oh my God, he asked me about your father's business, about clients, about deals in progress. I thought he was just making conversation. I gave him. She stopped, hand over her mouth. Oh God, I could lose everything. My career, my reputation. You already did, Grace said bluntly. My father fired you 3 days ago for breach of trust and potential corporate espionage. Sienna started crying in earnest now. This is all my fault. I destroyed my career, my integrity, your pregnancy, everything, for a man who used me. Not all your fault, Grace corrected. Ethan is very good at manipulation, very good at finding vulnerable people and exploiting them. You're not the first woman he's conned. I doubt you'll be the last. Why are you being kind to me? Sienna asked through tears. After what I did? Because kindness is a choice, Grace said simply, and because I can help you. If you help me. Sienna looked up wary. How? Tell the truth about the affair, about when it started, about what Ethan told you about me, about what he said his plans were. Give us everything you know, texts, emails, recordings if you have them. A full statement, signed and notarized. He'll destroy me. Grace leaned forward. He already is. Right now, as we sit here, Ethan is telling everyone that you seduced him, that you're obsessed with him, that he tried to end it, but you threatened him, that you're the villain in this story. Sienna's face went white. That's a lie. I know, but that's his next move. He makes women fight each other so no one looks at him. He positions himself as the victim caught between two crazy women. It's a strategy, Sienna, and it works. Long pause. Sienna wiped her eyes with shaking hands. What do you want from me? Everything you know, every conversation, every message, every moment when you thought something was off but ignored it. I want the truth. All of it. And in exchange, my father's lawyers will protect you. They'll help you avoid criminal charges for the information you gave Ethan. They'll negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony. Why would you do that for me, after what I did? Grace's answer was simple. Because I don't want revenge on you. I want justice from him. There's a difference. And because every woman who's ever been manipulated by a man like Ethan deserves a chance to make it right. After a long moment, Sienna spoke quietly. He has a burner phone for the offshore accounts. He thinks I don't know about it, but I saw him using it once at the gym. He keeps it in his locker there, locker 217. Can you get it? I have his combination. He gave it to me months ago, said it was for emergencies. I can get it. Do it, Grace said. Today. Bring it to my father's lawyers. They'll handle everything else. Sienna stood to leave, then paused. Grace, I really am sorry. About the slap, about the affair, about all of it. I'll have to live with what I did for the rest of my life. I believe you, Grace said, but sorry doesn't erase it. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. You'll have to live with that, and so will I. Sienna nodded, understanding. I know. She walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. For what it's worth, he doesn't deserve you. He never did. I hope you and your baby have a beautiful life. Then she was gone. Marcus approached Grace's table. You think she'll actually help? Grace watched Sienna walk away through the window, seeing her make a phone call, probably to Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell already. Hell hath no fury like a woman who realizes she was a pawn. Marcus smiled slightly. Your father said you were brilliant. He was right. I learned from the best, Grace said, one hand on her belly, feeling her baby kick in response. She had turned an enemy into an ally. She had chosen compassion over vengeance. And in doing so, she'd gained the most powerful weapon possible, the truth. 3 days later, Hartford Technology's headquarters gleamed in the morning sun. The press room on the 10th floor was packed beyond capacity. Dozens of reporters, cameras from every major news network, lights blazing like a Broadway opening. The podium bore the Hartford Technologies logo, polished and professional. Grace stood in the prep room next door, staring at her reflection. She wore a simple but elegant black dress her father had bought her. Not designer, not ostentatious, just professional. Her baby bump was clearly visible. The bruise on her cheek had faded to yellow-green, but was still noticeable. She'd covered it with minimal makeup. Jennifer Hayes, the PR consultant, had advised her to let people see it. "You look like a survivor," Jennifer had said. "Let them see what he did." Richard stood beside Pierre, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." "I'm ready," Grace said, though her hands shook. "I'm tired of letting him control the narrative. I'm tired of being the villain in my own story." Sarah Mitchell entered, holding a tablet. "Sienna came through. She delivered the burner phone last night. Our forensic team has been working all night. The evidence is extraordinary. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, conversations with money launderers. Ethan Vale is going to federal prison." Grace felt a surge of grim satisfaction. "Good. The FBI is coordinating with NYPD," Sarah continued. "They're planning to arrest him today, probably in the next few hours. We timed the press conference accordingly. By the time he sees us on the news, he'll already be in custody." Jennifer stuck her head in. "We're ready. Full room. CNN is carrying it live. Fox News is picking up the feed. This is going everywhere." Grace took a deep breath. Richard took her hand. "Together?" "Together," Grace agreed. They walked to the podium together, father and daughter. The room erupted with shouted questions immediately. Richard held up one hand, commanding silence with nothing but presence. "Good morning. My name is Richard Hartford. For those who don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Hartford Technologies. But I'm not here today as a CEO." He paused, looking at Grace with unmistakable love and pride. "I'm here as a father." He gestured to Grace, who stepped closer to the microphone. Cameras flashed like lightning. "This is my daughter, Grace. 3 nights ago, she was physically assaulted while 7 months pregnant. The man who should have protected her, her husband, laughed, and then he tried to rewrite what happened." The room was silent now, everyone listening. Richard nodded to someone off camera. The screens behind them lit up with video footage. "This is security footage from the Plaza Hotel," Richard said, his voice cold with controlled rage. "I want you to watch this very carefully." The footage played, crystal clear, professional quality. 8 camera angles merged into a cohesive timeline that told the complete story. Grace arriving alone, struggling, clearly uncomfortable. Ethan's face when he saw her. Annoyance, calculation, disgust. The confrontation, every word captured by the hotel's audio system. Ethan's cruelty. "You were just the entry ticket." Grace's slap, a reaction to verbal abuse. Sienna's slap, unprovoked violence against a pregnant woman. Ethan's laugh, cruel and deliberate. Grace collapsing, blood spreading. Ethan telling security to remove her. And finally, Ethan and Sienna kissing after the ambulance left, both smiling. Gasps filled the room. Reporters typed frantically. Cameras captured every moment. Richard continued, his voice steady. "Ethan Vale has spent the past 3 days claiming my daughter is mentally unstable, that she crashed his event, that she provoked an attack. The footage tells a different story." The next slide appeared. Bank records. "This is proof that Grace funded Vale Premium Auto Detailing with $50,000 from her personal savings 5 years ago. Her entire savings from 3 years of work as a public defender. Despite this, Ethan has claimed the business as separate property in divorce filings." More slides, email records. These are emails from Grace to former Columbia Law School classmates, introducing them to Ethan's services. 32 separate introductions over 5 years. Every major client Vale Premium has came through Grace's network. She built his business. He tried to erase her from it. Text messages appeared next. Audible gasps from reporters. These are messages between Ethan Vale and his mistress, Sienna Brooks, discussing their plan to divorce Grace after the baby was born and, quote, "take everything." This wasn't a marriage falling apart. This was premeditated financial abuse and fraud. Finally, financial records. These are records of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. So, Ethan Vale has illegally moved $1.2 million in marital assets to hidden accounts over the past 4 months. That's wire fraud. That's tax evasion. That's a federal crime. Richard stepped back from the podium. My daughter would like to say something. Grace stepped forward, her hands shaking as she gripped the podium. She looked directly into the cameras and saw herself on the monitors. Small, pregnant, bruised, but standing. 2 years ago, she began, her voice quiet but firm. I walked away from my father and my family because I thought I needed to prove I could make it on my own. I thought accepting help meant I was weak. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought suffering proved commitment. She paused, gathering strength from somewhere deep inside. I was wrong about a lot of things. But I wasn't wrong about this. No woman should be punished for trusting someone. No woman should be called crazy when she has evidence. No woman should be afraid to ask for help when she needs it. Her voice grew stronger. Ethan Vale is not the victim in this story. I am. My baby is. And every woman who's been told she's too emotional or too dramatic when she's being gaslit and lied to. Grace looked directly into the main camera. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to be ashamed. I gave him everything. My money, my connections, my love, my trust. And he tried to take more. But he made one mistake. She let the pause hang for effect. He picked the wrong family to mess with. Richard put his hand on her shoulder, protective and proud. The reporters erupted with questions, all shouting at once. Richard spoke over them, his voice carrying, "We're filing criminal charges for assault, civil suits for fraud, defamation, and theft of marital assets. And we forwarded evidence of offshore accounts and tax evasion to the IRS and FBI. That's all we have to say today." They walked off the stage together as reporters continued shouting questions. But Grace didn't look back. She'd said what she needed to say. The truth was out now. Behind the scenes, Jennifer was already watching the social media response in real time. "It's working," she said, her voice excited. "Twitter is turning. The hashtags are changing. People are calling out Ethan now. You're becoming the hero, not the villain." But Grace wasn't interested in being a hero. She just wanted to be free. Across Manhattan, in Ethan's penthouse apartment, the world was collapsing in real time. Ethan watched the press conference on his wall-mounted television, his phone exploding with notifications. Investors withdrawing, clients canceling contracts, business partners issuing statements distancing themselves. News alerts cascading across his screen. Vale CEO exposed in elaborate financial fraud. Plaza incident, new evidence shows systematic abuse. Billionaire father destroys daughter's abusive husband. His phone rang, his lawyer. "Ethan, we need to talk. The Hartford legal team just filed 47 separate motions. They're going after everything, your business, your assets, your freedom. There are criminal charges pending. They can't prove," the lawyer cut him off, urgent. "They have bank records showing the offshore accounts. They have text messages proving premeditation. They have video showing the assault. They have testimony from Sienna Brooks, who apparently gave them your burner phone. Ethan, you're looking at wire fraud, tax evasion, assault. This is federal. This is serious prison time." "Fix it," Ethan shouted. "That's what I pay you for." "I can't fix this, and I'm withdrawing as your counsel. I can't represent you if you lied to me about the assets and the accounts." "Good luck, Ethan. You're going to need it." Click. Dial tone. Ethan stared at the phone in disbelief. Then the doorbell rang. He opened it to find 4 FBI agents and 2 NYPD officers standing in his hallway. Behind them, paparazzi filled the corridor, cameras ready. "Ethan Vale?" "Yes?" "You're under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, assault, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They cuffed him. The metal was cold against his wrists. The agents led him into the hallway where camera flashes exploded like bombs. "Ethan, did you plan to steal from your wife? Were you ever going to acknowledge your child? Do you regret laughing when she fell? Is it true you've been hiding money in offshore accounts? How does it feel to lose everything?" Ethan's face went through shock, then anger, Then the slow realization that everything was destroyed. His business, his reputation, his freedom, all of it, gone in less than a week. The last image captured by the paparazzi showed him in the back of a police car, handcuffed, surrounded by cameras, the golden boy completely fallen. 6 months passed. Grace sat in a private birthing suite at Mount Sinai Hospital, 9 months pregnant now, her face showing determination mixed with fear. Richard sat beside her, holding her hand, coaching her through contractions. "One more push, Grace," the doctor said calmly. "You're almost there." "I can't," Grace screamed. "I can't do this." Richard stroked her hair, his voice steady and loving. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. You survived him. You built a new life. You'll survive this." "What if I'm a bad mom?" Grace's voice was small, vulnerable. "What if I'm not enough?" Richard's voice was absolute, certain. "You're already enough. You've always been enough. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." Grace pushed with everything she had. A baby's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. The nurse placed the baby in Grace's arms, and she looked down at him through tears. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, eyes that looked up at her with trust and newness and infinite possibility. "Hi," Grace whispered. "Hi, baby. I'm your mom." The baby made a soft sound, and Grace felt her heart explode with love. "Dad, look at him." She turned to Richard. "He's absolutely perfect." Richard was crying openly now, not caring who saw. "He looks like his mother, beautiful and brave." "I'm going to name him after Mom," Grace said. "Carter. Carter James Hartford. Hartford, not Vale. I want him to have our family name." Richard's voice broke completely. "Your mother would be so incredibly proud of you, Grace, of who you've become, of your strength." "I hope so," Grace whispered. "I hope I can be half the mother she was." "You already are," Richard assured her. "You already are." Grace looked down at baby Carter and whispered, "I'm going to tell you everything about your grandma, about how she saw the best in people, about how your grandpa saved us when we needed him most. And someday maybe I'll tell you about your father, the truth about him. Not the lies he told, not the person he pretended to be, but who he really was. So you can learn from my mistakes and never make the same ones." Richard asked gently, "Will you let him see the boy someday, if he changes?" Grace considered carefully. "If he earns it, if he does real work, real therapy, real change, real accountability, but not until Carter is old enough to choose for himself. I won't force anything. And Ethan has to prove he's safe first. That's not negotiable." "That's wise," Richard said. 3 months after Carter's birth, Manhattan Family Court was quiet and official. Grace stood on one side holding baby Carter, Sarah Mitchell beside her. On the other side, a video screen showed Ethan in a prison jumpsuit, appearing remotely from a federal facility upstate. He looked different, thinner, harder, older. Prison had aged him. The judge read from the official documents. "In the matter of Vale versus Hartford, this court finds as follows. Mr. Vale is hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4.7 million to Mrs. Hartford for fraud and theft of marital assets. Full custody of the minor child, Carter James Hartford, is granted to the mother with no visitation rights for Mr. Vale until such time as he completes court-mandated therapy, demonstrates genuine rehabilitation, and the court determines it is in the child's best interest." The judge continued, "Vale Premium Auto Detailing is hereby dissolved, with all assets transferred to Mrs. Hartford as the original investor and rightful owner. Furthermore, Mr. Vale has been convicted in federal court of wire fraud and tax evasion and is currently serving a 7-year sentence. This family court takes that into consideration." Ethan on the screen looked broken, hollow, a shell of the charming bartender Grace had fallen for 7 years ago. "Mr. Vale, do you have anything to say?" the judge asked. Ethan's voice was barely audible. "Can I just see him? Just once? Please." The judge looked at Grace. "Mrs. Hartford, that's your choice." Long pause. Everyone in the courtroom watched Grace. She stood, walked toward the screen, turned so the camera could capture Carter in her arms. She held him carefully, protectively. Ethan stared at his son, tears streaming down his face. He's beautiful. He looks like you. Grace's voice was steady, neither cruel nor kind, just honest. His name is Carter, after my mother. He'll never have your last name. But I'll tell him you existed, that you made terrible choices, that you hurt people who loved you, and that loving the wrong person doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. Grace, I don't need your apologies, Grace interrupted. I needed them 6 months ago when I was bleeding on a ballroom floor. I needed them when I was alone in an ambulance wondering if my baby would survive. I needed them when I had nothing and no one. But I don't need them now. I have everything I need. She turned away from the screen, Carter secure in her arms. Outside the courthouse, autumn sun warm on her face, Grace walked down the steps with Richard beside her. Baby Carter sleeping peacefully against her chest. Reporters swarmed, but security kept them at a respectful distance. Grace, do you forgive him? Grace paused, looked directly at the cameras, and spoke from her heart. Forgiveness isn't for him. It's for Mehdi. I forgive myself for believing his lies. I forgive myself for thinking I had to prove something to the world. I forgive myself for pushing away people who love me. I forgive myself for all of it. That's the only forgiveness that matters. What's next for you? Grace smiled, and it was genuine. I'm going back to law, but this time I'm representing women like me. Women who gave everything and were told it was nothing. Women who need someone to fight for them the way my father fought for me. Richard added, his arm around her shoulders. She's opening a nonprofit law firm, Hartford Women's Legal Defense Fund. Free legal services for women escaping financial abuse, domestic violence, exploitation. I'm funding it, but Grace is running it. She's the boss. Grace looked at her father with love. We're partners this time. Real partners. Equal partners. They walked to the car together, security clearing a path through the crowd. Grace settled in the back seat with Carter while Richard drove. She looked down at her son, then out the window at Manhattan passing by. The city moved on, endless and uncaring, full of people with their own struggles and triumphs. Grace was just one more person trying to build something good from something broken. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had her father, she had her son, she had purpose. She had survived. As they drove through the city, Grace whispered to sleeping Carter, "Your grandpa didn't save me that night at the plaza. He reminded me who I always was." Sometimes we need to fall apart completely before we learn how strong we really are. And sometimes the greatest love story isn't about romance. It's about the people who catch you when you fall. She kissed his forehead gently. You'll grow up knowing your mother wasn't perfect, but she was brave enough to ask for help. And that's real strength, baby. That's real love. The car drove on through the afternoon sun, carrying them toward whatever came next. Grace didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Ethan would ever change, if Carter would want to know him someday, if her law firm would succeed. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again confuse sacrifice with love. She would never again prove her worth through suffering. She would never again mistake pride for strength. She had learned the hardest way possible, but she had learned, and she would make sure no other woman had to learn the same lesson alone.